Awesome. Tina, can you give me a thumbs up if that looks good? Perfect. Okay. Awesome. So, yeah, my name is Kylie. I'm a fourth year PhD student in clinical psychology, but also joined by some other project short mentors here for the Q&A afterwards so that we can give lots of different perspectives on different types of graduate programs and graduate applications. But today, yeah, like I mentioned, I'll be talking about finding the right fit for a graduate program and also preparing that application packet. So, some goals for the seminar today. I'll be kind of going over the application timeline. I know we're sort of already in the midst of graduate application season, but what you can expect for the next couple months before deadlines come up. And then going over graduate program fit and also finding an advisor or a research mentor. We'll also go over the components of a graduate application and what is typically common for you to submit in those applications. And then a little bit more in depth of CVs today, but there'll also be a separate webinar, I think next week, on how to write personal statements and statements of purpose. Okay, so this is a little bit of what the application timeline looks like. Right now, we're here in September, getting close to October. So right now, making a school or program list is a great place to start. If you haven't already identified some schools and some programs that interest you and match with your research interests. And also, right now is a great time to start preparing some of those written documents. So, we'll talk a little bit more later about the different components of graduate applications, but typically that's your personal statement or statement of purpose. Sometimes it's called a research statement. Also, the diversity statement, as well as your CV, and then any other supplemental written documents that they might request from you. Also, in October, you can start reaching out both to professors or advisors that you're interested in working with. So, those would be the advisors that you're directly applying to, and asking your current advisors or your current professors if they'd be willing and able to write you a letter of recommendation. So, kind of getting those prepared as well, as that's one of the components of your graduate application. And as we move into November, December, that's when you'll finalize those applications, make sure everything gets into those portals, and you'll hit apply. Usually, application deadlines vary. Sometimes they can be earlier, like November 15th is a common one. December 1st and December 15th are also common deadlines. So you'll want to go ahead and check what deadline goes with what program, since not all programs are streamlined in that way. A lot of programs have different dates for their application deadlines. And then looking forward into the beginning of next year, so January through March, that's when interviews and decisions will happen. So not all programs will require interviews, but some do. So in these early kind of winter, spring months is when those interviews will happen. And then also when decisions will be released. And in April, typically April 15th is kind of the deadline to accept offers, but this can also vary by program. That's when you will decide if you've accepted an offer or received an offer, whether you want to accept it. So there are a lot of different factors you can consider when looking at fit with a graduate program. So it can start really broad, for example, location or country that you might be interested in applying to. So that could be the United States, that could be Canada, Australia, UK. There's lots of different countries or regions that you could be applying to. So, kind of thinking more broadly about where you'd like to live, applying to a graduate program. Those programs take a very long time, so envision yourself being there for 4, 5, or 6 years sometimes, and if that would be a good fit for your lifestyle as well. Then you can think about, areas of interest and research centers. So perhaps some regions or areas might be more well versed or well known for different research topics. And then you can kind of narrow it down to more department or program level, as well as professor or research group level. So there's lots of different factors that you can consider when looking at fit with a graduate program. And programs vary a lot. They can vary in size. So some programs have a lot of students, some programs are more small and have smaller cohorts. The length of your program. So some programs, it's typical for students to graduate in 4 years. Other programs, it might take a little bit longer for students who typically graduate and defend their dissertations. Also, the structure of the program. So, some programs are really kind of course heavy towards the beginning and then move towards more of those research milestones later on in the program. Some of them are interspersed throughout the program. So, there can be different structures and also different requirements. So, again, sort of the class or course based requirements may differ between program. Your research milestones may differ between programs, so those are also something you can take into consideration. Career preparation or employment. So, what types of jobs or careers are students obtaining after graduation? And does that fit with your career goals and what you're interested in pursuing after graduate school? Also, the culture of the program. Often, this can be best, I don't know, you can get a good look into that by asking fellow graduate students. They can often let you know what the culture of the program might be. And then funding mechanisms. So you may be funded through a teaching assistantship, a research assistantship. Perhaps there's some fellowships that are available through the program. So there's lots of different funding mechanisms as well. So how do you find a graduate program? There's many out there, lots of different universities have them. So looking through university and department websites for your area of interest is a good way to start. Also on social media, lots of professors and advisors like to post their research and also post if their lab is accepting a student in any given cycle. Perhaps you have a current mentor or a current professor who could give you suggestions of who is doing work in the area that you're interested in. And also word of mouth, or sometimes there's some spreadsheets that go around in the social media verse that also keep a running list of advisors and graduate programs that are accepting students. So for finding an advisor, similar to finding a program, all of those same options apply. So looking through those department websites and on social media, but some additional tips for finding a specific research advisor to work with. Often, professional societies have some job postings for PhD positions. I will say those are less common in the United States, as far as I know, but more common for European programs that they'll have professional society postings for those. PI or professor lab websites, often those have sections in them about joining the lab or for prospective graduate students and gives more details and more information about what they're looking for in a graduate student and how to apply to their lab. Department websites also often have a list of the different professors who might be accepting students in that given cycle. So that's a good place to check first before checking maybe some other places. And then you can also email advisors to find out if they are accepting students directly. But like I mentioned, I would try searching either the department website or the professor or lab's website first, because oftentimes they'll post there whether or not they're accepting students, so you can skip the email portion. So, when should you reach out to an advisor? This is kind of an optional thing. So, reaching out to advisors is not mandatory, but is something that's also common in the graduate application process. So, for application deadlines in November or December, I do recommend reaching out Even right now, since we're already approaching October through mid-October, typically in October, professors have a better idea of funding and whether or not they will have the funding and space to accept a student during this cycle. Advisors might also ask you to schedule a preliminary interview. Again, this depends on the field that you're applying to. So, not all professors might schedule a preliminary interview with you. And it could be advisor dependent as well. So, some advisors kind of explicitly state that they won't do preliminary interviews. So, it sort of just depends on, again, both the field and the advisor that you're interested in working with. Like I mentioned, emailing advisor before application submission is not mandatory, but can help show interest in the advisor and the lab's work. And for some fields, especially rotation based fields, it can be beneficial to ensure that there's multiple potential advisors within a single program that you might be interested in working with. Okay. For emailing advisors, I've included kind of a template email here, and I'll make sure these slides get out so that you have access to those. But keep the email short and to the point. So, sort of just expressing interest and also confirming or asking if they are taking a student, if that information can't be found elsewhere. It's also helpful to attach your CV just so they can get an idea of who you are as a student and do a quick overview. And if you don't get a reply, you can also send a follow up email if needed. I will say it's also common for professors not to get back to you, and that's not anything about what your email said or who you are as an applicant. Many professors just get so many emails during this time that they simply can't reply to all of them. So it's pretty common if you don't receive an email back from a potential advisor. Okay. So for the different application components, typically there is a portal or application form that you'll have to fill out, mostly with just some background information about yourself. They'll also usually ask for a CV or a resume, and then a research statement or statement of purpose. More popular is also a diversity statement that is recommended, as well as letters of recommendation and transcripts. There's some other application materials that kind of vary depending on the program. So, some programs might require GRE scores, a writing sample, or maybe some school specific question prompts that they'd like you to fill out. For international students, some of those English scores they might require, as well as an application fee typically. So, very briefly, a statement of purpose or research statement. Again, next week, Project Short is hosting a specific webinar on how to create a personal statement or statement of purpose. So, they will go more in depth into talking through this. But some typical things to include in your research statement would be your past research experience, your current experience, and your current research interests, kind of a brief summary of what your research ideas are and what you'd like to pursue as a graduate student, as well as the advisor or lab you'd like to work with and why they're connected to your research interest, as well as your professional goals. So it's recommended that you create more of a story or a narrative and not just kind of list line by line what's already on your CV. And you want to make sure to tailor your statement of purpose to each program to make sure it's personalized for every program and advisor that you apply for. The diversity statement is becoming more common as an application component for graduate school. And this is a statement that addresses past or potential contributions to diversity. And this could be through teaching, research, volunteer service. And it's also a reflection of the values you hold in relation to diversity and its principles. So, again, here are some options for some things you can include in a diversity statement. It doesn't always have to be your personal background, it can also be diversity related activities and plans for graduate school and how you plan to implement those. Letters of recommendation are also typically required for graduate programs. Most applications require at least three letters, sometimes more, sometimes only two, but three I would say is the most common. And as far as who you're asking, so wanting a letter of recommendation from a research advisor, so someone you worked under and did research experience with, or any professors that you might have taken courses with while at university. And you'll want to prioritize those who are in fields already that are similar to the field of interest that you intend on applying to. So, for example, if you're applying to epidemiology programs, it's beneficial to ask a research advisor or professor who's also in epidemiology to write a letter of recommendation for you. In the letter of recommendation, some things you'll ask them to include will be some concrete examples of the skills that you have or the research experience that you gained while under their mentorship. And also, they'll touch a little bit on readiness for graduate school and ability to succeed in graduate school. For asking for letters of recommendation, it's always best to give advisors and professors advance notice, so about 6 weeks or more. So, again, for those November, December deadlines, right now in the month of October is a really great time to be reaching out and asking if they'd be willing to write those letters of recommendation. You can also ask if they want reminders to upload or send the letters of recommendation. So typically, you can send a reminder a week or two before the deadline, as well as a few days before the deadline. And you'll also want to make sure to send your letter writer some important information. So, lists of programs, due dates, and they may also ask you for your CV and your statement of purpose or research statement. So again, here is another template that you can use in requesting a letter of recommendation. Although, of course, it's best if you can ask them in person whenever possible, recognizing that you may not always be working in person with this research advisor. But if you can, asking in person and then sending a follow up email is best. And we recommend asking if they're comfortable writing a strong letter of recommendation. So you want the strongest letters that you can. So making sure that they can speak very highly about the skills that you gained is best. And after asking for letters of recommendation and they've been able to send them through those application portals, sending a written thank you note is always great and appreciated for them as well. Okay, the last portion of the application that we'll talk about today is the CV. So, a CV is basically a long document that highlights your academic and professional accomplishments and experiences, and is one of the most important documents in any graduate school application packet, just since it does go over all of that background detail about you. There are some differences between a CV and a resume. So, a resume typically emphasizes skills and work experience and is used more for industry or positions outside of academia. It's also typically pretty short, so about 1 to 2 pages in length, and starts with more of that work experience. So, you may not include research experience or posters or publications unless they're highly relevant to the position that you're applying for. For a CV, these are going to emphasize more of your academic achievements and relevant experience in the field that you're applying to, and is commonly used for graduate school, grants, fellowships, and other positions in academia. And these are typically longer than 2 to 6 pages since you'll be including a lot of research experience and academic experience. So these can be 2 to 6 or even sometimes more pages as you get further along in your career, and typically starts with that education section rather than work experience. There are many different ways to create a CV, and it may be that you need to tailor your CV to each application depending on the fields that you're applying to. Maybe you're applying to two different fields, although they might be adjacent. And we recommend having someone proofread your CV as well as your other application materials before you submit them, just to have a set of eyes on them. So this could be your project short mentor, for example. It could also be another trusted mentor that you have, a faculty member, or maybe a graduate student that you've worked with before. You can also look up CVs of professors or graduate students in your field to get an idea of how they're typically formatted and what they typically include. And as I mentioned, different disciplines or fields often have different preferences for content and formatting of the CV. So, some things to include in your CV would be your contact information that's typically listed at the top, as well as going through your education. And here you can also list if you completed a thesis or other large research project. You can list your honors and awards, as well as your research experience, any posters, presentations, or publications you may have, you'll want to include on your CV, as well as any relevant work experience. So, this could be teaching, volunteer, or leadership experience that directly relates to the field that you're applying for. And some optional sections would be some professional affiliations. So, if you're a member of any professional societies, any relevant skills or certifications that you may have that are relevant to your field, as well as references, although there's typically a separate section in the application portal for you to input that information anyway. For organization and formatting of the CV, it's best to use a consistent formatting style. So I know for psychology, we use APA style, but whatever formatting style is most common in your field, go ahead and consistently use that throughout your CV. Using clear, bold headings and page numbers, as well as easy to read fonts. So 11 or 12-point font and Arial and Times New Roman are just some typically common fonts, but just an easy to read font. You'll want to use an active voice rather than a passive voice, especially when talking about current experiences that you have. And you'll want to organize your CV so that the most relevant sections are towards the top, and then working downwards to sections that might not be as relevant or as recent to your field. So here are some section examples that you can just take a look at as far as how to format and also things to include. But again, this can vary depending on field and discipline, how they want them formatted and what types of sections that they're looking for in your CV. And a couple of CV do's and don'ts. So, again, do tailor your CV for every application. You may not have to tweak a lot, but every once in a while you might have to adjust the order, or maybe you include an experience that you didn't include in another application. You want to update your CV frequently. Oftentimes, it can get put on the back burner and kind of get lost. So it's nice if you're able to update that more frequently so you remember all the experiences and skills that you gained. Make sure to make lots of edits and also have someone proofread it. So, again, whether that's your project short mentor or another trusted mentor or advisor that you know. For some don'ts, not to use too flowery of language or getting too wordy. Often CVs are best um, written concise and more to the point as far as your experiences. Don't pad your CV, so don't include too many things that aren't relevant to the field of interest that you're applying for. And also don't include personal details or a headshot. This can vary by country, but I know at least in the US and Canada, including a headshot in your CV is not typically common. And then these are some additional resources for example CVs, example personal statements, some templates that you might be able to use. So those links will be available for you when we send the slides out. And that is all that I have for the presentation portion of today's webinar. I'll go ahead and stop